Yeah. I mean, you could just say that now.
Let's go.
Yay!
Yeah. You said it in a much more cartoony voice a second ago, but I wasn't recording at that point, so we're going to have to move on. Unless you want to do it again.
I am not your performing monkey.
Yes, you are. That's why you're here.
Cheers, thanks. It's good to know where I lie in this.
You need to know your place. So today we're going to be recording a couple of episodes. So the second episode, which will be next week, don't moan at us if we start going off on like tangents all over the place, because we will have already been speaking for about an hour. But the first one, i.e. today's episode, now, yeah, I'm like today's, but they're both today's. This week's episode is going to be about modern education, curriculum, collector's fallacy, RSS feed and subscriptions, which is a boo-boo that I made, and then suing for intellectual property, which is going to be an interesting discussion, I think.
Wow, we're actually telling people what we're talking about. What are we doing?
I know. I'm like fully planned out. That's mainly for accountability, so I remember to go through them all.
We're gonna forget. We're totally gonna forget. Okay, let's go. Let's go.
So the reason I put on the modern education and curriculum is because I'm going through, I asked myself this question because I want to do this for a video on the main channel, is what's the point of school? Like, is school worth it? Those sorts of questions. Yeah, I see your face. And my original answer to this was maybe, but I don't think so. And having looked at a lot of the stats from a document given out by, it's called PISA, P-I-S-A. It's from OECD, which is basically a load of countries say, yes, have a look at my school system. And PISA gives out loads and loads of documents and stats and stuff. And looking at it, basically suggests that education is extremely important for loads of things, because if you don't have upper secondary education, tertiary education, then lots of things are not available to you. One of the most striking ones is the fact, this mind blew me when I read this. People with tertiary education live 5 years longer than people without tertiary education.
Wait,
yeah.
What?
Yeah, on average, this is across 96 different countries. On average, people with tertiary education live to 54. Obviously, some of these countries are not first world countries, so the average age goes down. And then not with tertiary education, it's 49, right? Which I was like, actually, that makes sense, because people with tertiary education have a critical mind, whether they liked it or not, whether they feel like they got anything from it or not, or whether they disagree with it or not, they still have the ability and the awareness to question certain things, which is a skill you learn in tertiary education.
That's why you have to wait so fucking long to do it. It's my problem. Sorry.
But this is where I wanted to bring it in the curriculum, because I think modern education, i.e. tertiary education, doesn't have to be formal, because I think modern education is a set of skills that you can develop, which I think can be in a modern curriculum, which is where informal education, i.e. online learning, what we're doing right now, comes in. And I think there are skills that you can learn online by yourself that would mimic much of tertiary education. So is school worth it? Yes. Can it be better? Hell yes. And I think the informal education part of this, the modern curriculum, as it were, well, I think help people if they sort of adhere to the modern curriculum. I don't want to use my own term being an internet academic, but I think if people have those skills, being critical, looking for synthesis, looking for references, looking for sources, asking questions like, why do I know this? Does this really work? And instead of just listening to whoever's in charge and say, yep, you're right, and challenge them, those skills are the skills you learn in tertiary education. Sometimes you learn it in the first week. Sometimes it takes you like 5 years. But most of the time people get there.
I think one thing, so I have, for context, I have 2 children who are both in the traditional education system. Yeah, I have thoughts, loads of them, not all positive. But one thing that we're looking at now,
I imagine they mimic a lot of teachers and parents' thoughts.
Yeah, pretty much. What I noticed now is recently we went and spoke to a specialist school for my 2 kids. So both my children are on the spectrum, they are autistic, and the school's focus is on them. and it's the student at the center, which is really important, because then they'll actually be self-motivated. And what I think is happening, or they're more likely to be self-motivated. You can't force them, but you know what I mean. Like, they are more likely.
That's why I did that.
Yeah, they're more likely to be self-motivated because it's them at the center rather than just trying to force them through and to tick boxes. I think my problem with the first two, school chunks, we'll call it that, so I don't have to put it in English and then try to translate to American, is the fact that it's just about getting them ready for a certain type of work. And there's not a lot of, or at least in my experience with them and my experience from being in school, and it has got better, I have to say, it is slightly better, I guess. I'm being kind. I don't agree with it, but it's slightly better than it used to be. But still, it's very much do this. There is one right way to do things, do this, and then that's it. Because it's easier for the teachers to teach one thing versus trying to individualize the learning to each pupil. And the school system is not designed for individualized learning unless you go to a specialist setting, which I understand. And these are the affordances we have to have, as well as the constraints. Look at me using foreign language. Understanding that they are there, but also realizing that it's not as suited for purpose as it was originally.
All right, I'm going to poke you on that one. I completely disagree with that last bit. I think schools do exactly what they were built to do.
Oh, yeah, they do what they're built to do, but what they're built to do is based on a very long time ago, not based on now.
Yes, ish. The system hasn't changed, and the system does exactly what it was built to do, but the workforce has changed, and the system hasn't changed to the workforce.
Yes. Yeah.
That's how I would see it. And just going back to when you were saying, like, going like part one, part two, don't know how to like match it to the American system. What PISA do is quite interesting. They say you have pre-primary, then you have primary, then you have secondary, and then you have upper secondary, and then you have tertiary. That's how they separate it, because all the countries are so different with all, because obviously like 96 whatever countries, they're all different. They all have different ages and ranges, and some countries literally go from 3 years old to 16, and that's just one thing. Like there's no primary, secondary, it's just school is 3 to 15. And then obviously you've got UK, America, split it up in different ways. And then even within countries, you've got different places. Obviously, the UK isn't just the UK educational system, because the UK system is different from the Scottish system. Like they're two different things. Yeah, great. Thanks, independence. But with the educational system, I think the problem isn't the teachers, and the problem isn't the parents of the students.
Never. Correct.
The problem is the government's educational system metrics, and the metrics being standardized tests. Yeah, standardized tests. The reason the teachers need to teach for themselves, i.e. to keep their jobs, is measured by standardized tests. So the teachers, to keep their job, need to teach the students how to pass the test, otherwise they lose their job. But the teacher doesn't want to teach to pass the test. Most teachers, actually, when you interview them and you look at the stats, they want to teach the kids because that's what they got into teaching for. And it's those teachers that get frustrated by, we need to do this curriculum stuff, we need to do this test stuff, we need to focus and make sure you pass the exams, etc., which is where the PISA rankings is actually interesting. When you look at things like homework time in lessons, homework time in lessons, and then the teacher allocation, like ratio and times and how many tests they do, the countries right at the top are like places like China that have loads and loads and loads of testing, loads and loads and loads of homework, loads of this. But then just underneath that, you've got countries like Estonia and Finland that have almost zero homework. They have hardly any tests. I think Finland, according to the stats, have like 2 or 3 tests throughout their entire educational system. 2 or
Wow.
3 actually like formally assessed tests. They have tests throughout it, but that's for learning purposes. And then you've got like the UK at rank 13. US is like 25.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Finland, I think, are like 8, 9. Estonia are like 5, 6. China's at the top. But you're like, okay, so money obviously isn't a thing either, because the US, I think it's Luxembourg, puts in loads of money. It might be Luxembourg, I can't remember exactly, but they put in tons and tons of money. And you're like, well, your system's not even that good according to the standardized tests. But then when you look, and this again really piqued my interest, those countries that are good on the PISA rankings, that's mainly the primary, secondary education. It's 15-year-olds that they're testing. When you look at the universities, none of the top 10 in PISA have any universities in the top 10. So let me, like, for context, the countries that have good primary and secondary education in the top 10 have no good university, i.e. tertiary institutions. But the countries,
wow.
but the countries that have good tertiary institutions, UK, America, that's it, have loads of money. And I'm like, right, okay, so the tertiary education is so expensive that the good countries in primary and secondary education just can't afford it. But my question then is, okay, if they've got good primary and secondary education, do they even need tertiary education? Because they go straight into the workforce. A lot of people from Finland, Estonia, and even China start their own businesses, or they start going into business or working for businesses, doing work placements. They're in the workforce straight after secondary school. Whereas the UK and America, you need to go to university and do another 3, 4, 5, 6, 10 years in tertiary education because money. Yeah,
That's super
big
interesting.
conversation.
Actually, that is super interesting. Huh.
And you think, if there is a modern curriculum, which is where like my mind goes,
Yeah.
you use, because there are some things that schools are really good at teaching: how to read, how to do basic math, basic science.
Yes. Yeah.
Like, that's good. That's the pre-primary school, and the primary school, great, do it, use it, explore stuff. As soon as you get to secondary school, that's where standardized testing starts to become a bit more of a pain in the bum.
That's exactly where my wife and I have gone with our two. Primary education, it does do what it's meant to do. It gives you a basic understanding, a basic knowledge of a whole range of things. It's kind of like taking a brush and painting a general starting point.
Just
There's
like a 2-year-old.
Yeah, exactly. It's just getting you started in the world. But then beyond that, it's like, okay, standardized testing, if I'm not mistaken, has been proven multiple times not to work. I don't have any papers to cite, but I'm sure you may do. But from what I've seen, it's not been proven to work. And so many people are dropping out, and so many people are looking at alternative education because of the standardized testing which is going on, which doesn't really serve, well, it does. It serves the purpose of the school, not the purpose of the student. It's focusing on making sure the school looks good. I can only talk about the UK, obviously, because that's where I'm from, but it makes the UK look good, not the actual students themselves. It makes the school look good. And this is something that I did when I taught music. So when I taught music, I taught very differently depending on what my students wanted. If they were looking to go into exams, or they were looking to do music like theory or music exams, I changed the subject at the center. We may need to move that one up at the top into this episode, because we're kind of talking about that now. Like the subject at the center. Let's move that up.
Oh, and then we'll move that one down. There we go.
Yeah. So what I mean by subject at the center is like, what is the main focus? What is the purpose? What are you going after, is how I've interpreted the information. It's like when the subject at the center is the student, which is my belief is the best way of working, although is not practical in a traditional school setting. It allows for them to develop. It allows for that to happen. But when I was teaching music, I did peripatetic music teaching, so I taught guitar. I had two types of students. One type of students wanted to go in and do their RGT, Royal College of London. That was the wrong initials, but whatever. They wanted to do their guitar tests and they wanted to get grades and all that lovely stuff. Great, fantastic, wonderful. And then we had the students who just wanted to explore and enjoy music. So for me as a teacher, the focus was very different depending on where they were going and what they wanted to achieve, where they wanted to go. And for people who, for kids who wanted to get their exams and go through that, the focus was very regimented and structured. It's like, okay, you're going to practice this, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. It's like, follow this. This is how you learn. This is the right way. Although to be fair, I couldn't help myself rebelling and going, this is how they want you to do it, but this is how you can do it, because that's my bias. And then for students who wanted to enjoy and just play stuff that they enjoy, music that they enjoy, it was a very loose structure that allowed them to just explore versus assess. Yeah. And I think that's kind of like the big difference.
Standardized tests are really good at measuring a specific thing at a specific time on a specific day. Yeah. That's what they're really good at, and they're useful for comparison and measuring comparison. But the problem is the comparison is normally quite arbitrary and actually pretty useless, because just because you are good at a test doesn't mean you're good at applying the test information in practice. And we can put this in so many different places, and we're going to talk about ecological dynamics in the next episode. But I'm just going to say this very, very quickly, because this is a really nice example, I think, that people can grasp. The combine is a test in American football, and you have to test people's physical ability. Just because you can run really fast in a straight line does not mean you can run really fast in a straight line with people trying to get in the way.
Yeah.
They are two completely different skills, but the combine says you can run this really quickly. I'm going to sign you up. You put one person in the way and they have to change direction. They've hurt their ankle, they've hurt their knee, or they've slowed down so much that they're awful. I don't know American football players that much, but I know there is an example of a really prominent American football player. Sorry, Americans, I don't know it that well. I know the research around it. And he sucked in the combine. He was awful. He was like below average, but he was one of the best quarterbacks, or runners. I can't remember which one it was. But he was one of the best in the world. But his combine results were awful. Like, they were awfully subpar, because the test wasn't actually testing the actual ability on the field. And that applies to almost all tests, standardized tests in education. Just because you're good at answering that question doesn't mean you actually know the thing. I was having a look because I couldn't quite remember the theory. I knew it was relative theory, but there was another word. It's called relative deprivation theory, and it's from psychology. And I came across this a while back. And when I was reading through this education, I was like, there's that theory. What is it? And basically, the theory suggests that relative deprivation theory, anyway, suggests that you are going to associate yourself with the relative environment around you rather than the absolute. Yeah. So you're going to look at the 10 people next to you rather than the 100,000 people that are in other schools, right? And I think it was Malcolm Gladwell that actually said this. Elite institution cognitive disorder is what he called it. But basically, if you go to a top school, you may think you're really dumb when you compare yourself to everyone in your class. So you think, oh, I'm really dumb, I'm really stupid, I'm down the bottom of the class. But if you're in a top school, you needed really good grades to get there. So you might actually be in like the top 2% in the whole country. Yeah. But you're at the bottom of your class. So you think you're stupid, so you don't do X, Y, Z. And what Malcolm actually found, it was Malcolm. I'm looking at my Obsidian notes for reference. Sources. Anyway, what Malcolm actually found was that those in the top universities, in the top percentile, functioned the same, essentially, as those in bottom universities in the top percentile. Those in the bottom universities, top percentile, functioned better than those in the top universities in the second percentile. So you could be 85, but like the top 3/4 in the best university and function worse than someone in one of the worst universities in your country in the top percentile. Yeah, you could have spent your life doing exams and prepping and tons of hours, and then some people in your university are smarter than you, Harvard, Cambridge, whatever, and you're, oh no, I'm 85 percentile, I'm not that smart compared to all these people, I'm not going to do X, Y, Z, where you could have just gone to a really crappy university, been at the top easily, and you would have performed better. Now, it doesn't sound like that would be true, but the numbers don't lie.
Yeah. And it makes sense because it's motivation, isn't it? It is very much like personal motivation. If you're at the bottom, it's like, well, why do I bother? Why do I try? What's the point? It's like, I'm not good enough, so why do I bother? Whereas
Exactly.
if you're right at the top of your game, then you're gonna bother because, oh my God, it's so exciting. And so, like, look at me, I want to stay at the top because it feels good.
Exactly. And I think this is the takeaway that I have in my head is standardized tests. Obviously, yeah, you can separate people up, but with the system at the moment, you don't want to go to a good school, to a good university, or to a hard university. People go, I want to go to Harvard, I want to go to Cambridge, I want to go to this, that, and the other. You don't want to go there unless you know you're going to be in the top 99 percentile. Well, good luck with that.
Yeah.
Good luck with that. You've got people that have spent their entire lives studying for tests, which is the only thing they're going to be measured by. If you actually want to apply yourself in practice, don't go to a top university and potentially even drop out of university and college because you have the information to apply it to practice, which is what I think the higher PISA study results, the rankings, so the primary and secondary education, I think because they have the skills of tertiary education and they can apply that information in the real world, they don't need tertiary education. And when you look at a lot of successful people that are mainly entrepreneurs, they dropped out of college, out of university because they wanted to do their own thing. I'm thinking more like the Bill Gates of the world and like the Elon Musk, like the millionaires and billionaires. Sorry, John. They're a little bit more impactful than a Plymouth UK guy that sort of played music a bit and
Oh yes. Oh.
Well, I've never actually heard you play, so I can't even verify that. I can't even. I just know because you've said. I know you had a piano, but I've never actually heard you play. And you've said, oh, there's a video somewhere online, but I've never found it. I did look for it for like half an hour. But yeah, and so going back to the topic at hand, the standardized testing is not going to go away because that's how the government tries to bolster their egos and say, hey, look, we have a better education system than you. Actually, you don't.
You have a better testing system than you.
Exactly. And the thing is, they funnel tons of money in, and this is what drives me mad. They funnel tons of money in thinking it's going to solve the problem, but it doesn't. So the money is useful for teachers on the ground when it comes to their salaries, which is a whole other conversation, and the actual equipment. But some countries, they have to pay for their own equipment, not from the government, like the teachers have to pay for their own equipment. Some countries don't even have any equipment and they just teach with what they got. They don't get pens and paper and pads and iPads and laptops that's happened in COVID. They don't have any of that. They just have a whiteboard and chalk. That's it. And their education system isn't even that bad.
Yeah.
It's the opportunities after education that actually like causes the issues, but that's the economy of the country rather than the educational system of the country, which is why you get people from really, really poor countries like third world countries that are incredibly intelligent because they're motivated. They have the environment and the affordances to go out, explore, learn, do whatever. And they're not forced to learn. But then you've got the people that don't learn in those countries. And then again, you have that, well, you need to have some level of education. And that's where the skills of education comes in, which is obviously related to PKM, which could move us on, but I'm going to let you. Are you...
Yeah, I agree pretty much. There's not really much more to add. I think I said what I had. And it genuinely is. I think the way that the school system is currently designed is around testing, not around
learning,
education and learning. And
I see education and learning is different. So
they are different, but then they're not educating. They're educating people on getting tests, which
that's still education.
Yeah.
Exactly. I would say that they do a good job of educating people, but they
Yeah.
don't do a good job of helping people learn.
Yeah.
And there are some nuances in there. The main ones being I think education is the transfer of information like to a student. So a student receiving information and a teacher giving out information, or an educator rather than teacher.
Yeah.
If either of those things are happening, you're in an educational environment.
Mm.
Learning, however, is not education, because just because you've received information does not mean you're learning it.
Yeah.
And there are different stages of learning. What stages they are depends on the philosophy you take, which is my research. So yeah,
Yay.
that's complex. Now, when it comes to skills and modern educational curriculum and what I would class as modern skills for learning, the collector's fallacy has come up multiple times in the PKM space. And I can't stand it, personally. It's another one of those things that people love to talk about, like atomic notes. I'm like, no, down with the notes. Yeah, and the collector's fallacy, for those unfamiliar, basically suggests that you're collecting information, but you're not learning or doing anything with it, which is a quote, quote, bad thing. Now, actually, what I could do is be really professional and bring up a quote or something. That would be nice, wouldn't it?
Maybe.
To collect is a reward in itself. There we go. That's a quote from one of the many papers that I've got. And
yeah. And I remember, I'm going to poke you now. You were so critical of my collecting.
Mm-hmm.
Super critical of me collecting. It's like, you're not doing anything with it. You should do something with it. I am. I am collecting. And that is a thing in itself. And for me, as someone who spent a lot of time as a collector versus someone who transforms and blah, 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 it's not just about the reward of collecting, because as you start collecting, you just see things. What I think it was, I was doing what people who are not classed as collectors do, just here instead of visibly, so that everybody could see it.
So
was it efficient? Was it efficient? No, of course not. Was it the best possible way of doing it? No, of course not. But when you're still trying to figure it out, it sort of helps just to do something instead of not doing something.
Yeah, I think the way I saw it, which is me evolving as a learner, as an educator, just in general, is that I saw and still do see collecting as a shallow level of learning, which it is, because it's you becoming aware of a topic. It's not deep learning. And previously, I didn't see a difference between shallow and deep learning. I thought learning was just a thing that you do. And to learn, you need to do these sorts of things. But that's not entirely true, because learning also happens in shallow learning.
So just to clarify, did you see deep learning as the only form of learning? Is that what you're saying at the time?
Yeah, I saw learning as something to do with remembering and retrieval. If you can't remember, you can't retrieve, you can't use the information in a practical environment, then you hadn't learned it. But just okay. Yeah, because I was thinking, well, learning means you can use the skill. But what I hadn't made the connection in my mind was, obviously you can forget skills, you can sort of unlearn skills, and the unlearning of a skill would leave you to the exact same point as you would be with shallow learning, which is the awareness of the topic. And I think this has come to the forefront even more with my research into meta-ignorance and hypocognition, because you can not know what you don't know. But as soon as you collect something, or you see something, or you're aware of something, you now don't know you don't know it. You now know you don't know it. And that is learning. It's shallow learning, but it's still learning. And the collector's fallacy, I think, it's not learning. Like, just because you're collecting doesn't mean you're not learning, right? It just means that you're not learning things to a deep level of understanding. And there is a difference between learning something to a deep level of understanding and just learning about the awareness of something. And most of the articles that I've seen goes on to explain that knowledge of is not the same as knowledge about. And they don't talk about ecological dynamics at all. They don't talk about information processing at all. They just talk about it from an epistemological approach of saying knowledge is this, but knowledge isn't just one thing, because knowledge is an evolution. It's to use a Ludwig Wittgenstein, there we go, term, it's a cluster concept. Knowledge is a cluster concept because there are lots of things that it encompasses: truth, belief, justified. And then if you're looking at Gettier cases as well, if you want to have a look at knowledge, you can do. But the traditional view of what knowledge is a true justified belief. But the Gettier cases go against that because they are essentially true justified beliefs that aren't knowledge. They're not right. So it's a cluster. Knowledge is a cluster concept where it's just evolving knowledge. You can't, yes, I know this thing now, unless it's priori knowledge, which is a different topic. So I think the collector's fallacy is just a fallacy in itself.
Yeah, so I'm currently reading a book at the moment. Oh, what a surprise, called Indirect Work. And she talks about this, of like the layers of knowing. Now, bear in mind, this is a little bit more general, so probably is not as science-based, and you may cringe at some of it, but, you know, just I am bringing forth her ideas, not my own. There are three.
Contributing to the conversation.
Yeah, I'm contributing to the conversation. There are three different natures of knowing. This is the bit that I get a bit, some are higher quality than others. One level is focused on borrowed ideas, which is the concept of, well, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. It's like you take in from the stuff you take from media and experts and what you've learned from people you respect, but you don't really do anything with it. It's just there. So I suppose that is almost collected in a way. Then you have analyzed ideas. It's about learning the criteria for sound critical judgment so that you can have confidence that what I know is actually valid and worth knowing. Once again, sticky, but it's a nice idea. I can just see you fearful, just not reacting. The next level is analyze ideas that have been tested by human experience and have been judged accordingly. Judged, that's a word. Analyzed ideas that I've looked at critically testing them against my experience and the accumulated expertise of humanity in order to decide whether to accept or reject them. I am reading this directly from her work, from a quote that I've pulled. And then third is deep understanding, and is focused on introspection and a movement to inward knowledge. Now, one criticism I have is it's very easy to go into just complete and utter navel gazing, where you're like, oh, what do I think about this? Oh, yes, look at this. Oh, isn't this amazing? Oh, let me question everything forever and never go anywhere with it. But just in terms of like, enjoy that. Now have fun with that.
Did you put any references or citations in there by any chance?
Of course you didn't.
Of course you didn't.
Of course not.
Because the borrowing and reorganizing principle, the first point, is from John Swiller. They spoke about it in like 92. And obviously Bandura social learning theory is what that's built from, which is learning from others, which is from psychology and Vygotsky way back like 1920s. So it's certainly not new. Social learning theory and borrowing reorganizing principles are two massive theories, one of them in cognitive psychology, the borrowing and reorganizing principle, and social learning theory just in general pedagogy. So it's kind of like a, obvious, duh. The other, and then the second point was basically challenging what you recognize, which you don't have a choice. Like it's not a decision you make. Everyone makes a decision about whether someone agrees or disagrees with a point that they see. Like you can't not.
I'm not sure whether that's quite true.
Once you've perceived a piece of information, there must have been some sort of processing for you to have interpreted it, correct? Otherwise, you're not aware of it.
Yes.
So in order to become aware of a piece of information as knowledge, which is what she's talking about, there needs to be an element of processing, whether it's conscious or unconscious. So you have used preconceived notions and ideas from your prior experience to create an opinion about the perceived information that you're using, which is this knowledge. So whether you know about it or not, you've still created misconceptions, preconceptions about the information. And this is where like sharing knowledge becomes an issue, because everyone will use prior experience on what they see, which is why no one ever starts from zero.
Yeah.
So the choice to critique something isn't a choice. It can be another choice, but you've already done it, which is why when you first see something, you can have misconceptions, which is why it's a pain in the bum for educators to re-educate people about a misconception that they have, which is why when you share something that's not evidence-based, and then you have to try and justify why that person's first exposure to this thing isn't evidence-based, it's not supported by science, it's why it takes so long, which is why misinformation and fake news and stuff and the flat earth were just that whole thing is an issue, because they've been exposed to something, this information, they've created an opinion about it without really questioning or learning or doing any sort of intrapersonal skills, introspection. And then the educator sort of like second time around, when you're actually challenging, which is I think that third point, when you're actually challenging that thing, well, they've already got misconceptions and preconceptions and preconceived notions from it. So I wouldn't say the second point of making a decision about knowledge is any different from the third point she made. Because
which is the deep understanding.
Exactly. Because to challenge perceived knowledge, you are creating a deeper understanding, because you need to look at relational information. So in my mind, 2 and 3 for me are exactly the same thing, just in different words. And it's skipped the preconceived notions and the ignorance that comes with perceiving information. It skipped that step, whether that she knew about it or not, that might be her own hypercognition. And then for deep learning and understanding, well, you need intrapersonal skills to be able to do that. Otherwise, you're just going to be using confirmation bias and other cognitive biases that support your own preconceived notions, which again is an issue inside of meta-ignorance. And I mean, if you want to go Dunning-Kruger effect, you can go there as well. But that's another issue with deep learning. So for that step to happen, there needs to be understanding and awareness of what intrapersonal skills are, i.e. what is reflection? Do you know what the Kolb cycle is? Like, if you don't know what the Kolb cycle is or any other reflective cycle, can you really do deep learning? Potentially unconsciously, but that requires experience in either tertiary education or some equivalent skills, higher educational skills, to be able to do that, which again can come from being, I don't want to use my term, but being an internet academic and using those skills, or having learnt those through the environments you've been put in, whether that's a job you've been doing, your own research has led you to do this. Most people in the PKM space will have done that themselves, or through tertiary education. So the second and third point she's raised there, I think, misses the whole point of challenging knowledge. You need to know what you're challenging before you can challenge it. Otherwise, all you're doing is confirming your own biases, which is what the majority of people do, because the awareness, going back to a discussion that you and I have had about taking the red pill or the blue pill just accepting what it is, red pill actually challenging and being aware and focusing on something. That's a choice that you need to make with every piece of information you perceive. You can't take the red pill all the time, because you would never have a life. You would be in uncertainty all the time. That's the majority of my time. And for those that don't,
I was about to say, I was like, yeah, I know that feeling. Not to the same degree as you, I know, but goodness me.
Yeah. And for reference,
it's not an easy life.
Nope.
I could have been happy and I just took my blue pill and that would have been fine, but no, I decided to get hooked on them red pills and now I'm in trouble.
Yep. And the blue pill, red pill is a reference from the Matrix for those that are unfamiliar.
Of course, you uncultured swines.
Yeah. Yeah. Thoughts. I needed to have a little bit of a
I thought you would enjoy
Yeah.
that quote. I wanted to pass that to you because I knew you would have a difference with it. And I agree. It is one of my big problems with this book, like in general, is it is very much her biases shoved in everyone's faces. There is a lot of just like so close. I think it was like so close, almost there, but you miss this and you miss that, and I think that I don't have that as it's a bad thing. I'm not sure whether you and I differ on that.
I agree.
But it's not a bad thing, and I think it's really dangerous. And I want to make this clear because I think we're both on the same page as by your reaction. Like, we're not saying any of what we're criticizing is bad, and I have a feeling that often that is missed in the context of internet. The way that we are designed right now. Just because we do not agree does not mean that it is bad. It is just what we have. And that is really a key thing to bring to this page. This is not us going, the writer of this book, Indirect Work, is a dumbass and stupid, because there is value in what she has. There is value in what she has. It's just talking points to prompt more conversation. It allows you to, I suppose, one thing that I'm working on in terms of how I interact with learning, a lot of in the PKM space, it's learning, reading efficiently, reading things like speed reading, doing it this way, doing it that way, and like being really fast and just getting through it. One thing that this book has imparted to me, so to speak, is to really flip and slow the hell down with my reading instead of trying to speed through it. Because it allows you, and what she does, and what I think is really good with her book, and she has these intermezzos where she actually asks you to question your relationship with what you're reading. And it kind of, what you were talking about earlier of like going deeper into the understanding and going a layer deeper and like looking at your own biases, looking at what you're hearing, whether you're changing what she's saying to mean something that is not what she's saying, and being able to meet her where she is. And that isn't something discussed in the PKM space. It's all about be efficient, read really fast, go audiobooks. Like it's in the mainstream PKM. But if you go a little bit deeper, it's a little bit less like that. But what I found interesting with this book is the fact that, one, I'm doing it with a group of other people and we have one chapter a week. Oh my gosh, these chapters are short. I could read the book in a day. But that's not the point of the book. The point of the book is to slow it down. And that is something that I'm gathering from this book called Indirect. Indirect Work is the name of the book. Is that it is slowing down and being able to just sit with my own biases and actually being intentional with it, and being intentional with where I am in relation to the information I'm being provided. And I think that's quite an important thing to say. Do I agree with her? No. Some points she almost touches on my interpretation of ED, but still I'm like, you don't know what you don't know. Like, I'm still very much surface level of ED, which is why we got another thing coming up, because I'm super intrigued. And you can see that she touches some really nice points, and you don't have to know all about everything. And I think that's really important to say, because we go from one of the possible misconceptions from what we talk about here is like, there is a right way to gain knowledge. There is a right way to learn, and you should follow our way, or primarily yours, because I normally just listen and I'm with you on that one. That's the, but it's not one way, and however the way you do it is fine. There is nothing wrong with being a collector, as that's what we were talking about just a minute ago. Like, you can be a collector, just know this information. Like, it's kind of a, hey, look at what that means. That's the thing that it can mean, and that's neither bad nor good.
I think, to sort of move backwards a little bit to bring back up, the reason I don't like books when it comes to like writing books or consuming books is, well, I guess don't like isn't quite accurate. I'm not a fan of reading books. Is a lot of them are Gen Pop books, a lot of them are oversimplified because they're focused towards general population. So there are inherent assumptions that have been made. And if you are aware of the research behind it, the assumption becomes an irritation to you, which is why I don't read Gen Pop books, which is why I read more deep academic articles and books that are like thousands of pages long, because they cover the nuances. So I know the book isn't targeted for me because of the oversimplifications, but for the target audience, it's probably really useful for the awareness of the thing, which is exactly what we're talking about with collectors, the collector's fallacy. And when it comes to learning, I don't have a one way of learning, and you could take lots of different ways. And the collector's fallacy, the collection in general, I see it as something that we do anyway. And this is what I want to try and, I guess, emphasize a little bit, is everything that we talk about inside of learning theory isn't just this theory that's been plucked out of somewhere. It's people observing actual learning and then commenting on it. And this could be a theme, this could be a correlation, this might be how we work, we don't know. But everything is what happens. It's not a, when I read a theory about learning, I don't go, oh, do I do that? Because I know I do. It's not a question of, do I do that? Because I know I do that. The question should be asking a better question. When do I do that? Why do I do it then? Why do I not do it then? How can I then use that in XYZ way? Because they've studied it, they must do it. Not necessarily all the time. And for some things that people have found, I'm like, when do I, like, when I'm asking myself, like, when do I do that? It's because I will do it at some point, but maybe it's like once a year because it just wasn't my sample size, wasn't my type of learning style. I say learning style, but not the traditional learning styles, because that's just myth, rubbish, get rid of that. When I say learning style, is the style that I have adopted with my preferred efficiency in learning. It's a mad world. I have to like explain what a learning style is, but it's the misconceptions that are out there.
I think this is the same when it came to develop. It's a shift to a business perspective of like, when it came to developing what I was doing, a lot of it started from a person-centered approach. But then when I bring that to people, my audience, they were like, well, isn't it a person-centered approach all the time? And I'm like, no, it bloody isn't. Well, isn't that how it should be? Yes, it bloody should be, but it's not, and still isn't. It's everybody telling you what to do and everyone just follows it without thinking about, like, without having that criticism or that space to reflect and pause when you learn something new or new information is given to you. It is just a time for reflection. And I mean, yes, you probably do actually conscious reflection. I think I should clarify that, like actual intentional reflection, intention, and being more intentional about taking in the information that you take in and asking the questions. Like for you, were talking about like the what and the etc. I like asking, how do I do that? Like, what is, I suppose actually, if I rephrase that, what is my flavor of this way of working? What is my flavor? I like that. That's like, oh, cool. Yes, that's a thing. In what way do I do that? In what way do I do that? In what way do I behave in that way? When I was looking at Gestalt psychology, I'm like, okay, cool. In what way do I see that in my life? And there was loads. And then I realized the problem with Gestalt psychology of like cycles going round and round and going nowhere. Oh, yes, that I see that here. I see that there. Okay, now what? And I think there's a risk to go in binary, because that's basically how we're taught to behave, is in binary of like either bad, good, right, wrong, etc. But there's
straight back to standardized testing, comparison.
Yeah, precisely. And I quite like the idea of going, okay, well, this does make sense here. And this does make sense because we are not in a science lab. And in science, there needs to be a little bit more,
a lot more of control.
But there are way more affordances in the real life that will influence. Oh, did I use the right term? Am I correct there? Just I want to make sure that it's tracking.
You're going to have to carry on to see if it's correct, like
Cool,
contextually correct. Sounds good though.
Thank you. Thank you. But when it comes to the real life, there are other things that happen around you that will influence what you're doing, and that will influence or are part of what you do in the outside world versus in a controlled environment where the affordances and the constraints as well, I assume, are controlled. Well, they are the control. Yeah, correct.
So in the scientific like lab, there will be more constraints, which reduces the amount of affordances. Inside of the real world, there are less constraints, therefore there are more affordances. Whether you see the affordances or not depends on your expertise and the skill that you're doing, etc., etc. Yeah.
And the understanding, just because I'm going to ask now, I know we're doing a whole episode, but I just want to, these are the things that I'm catching now, and I'm like, okay, I really want to get there. So with what my understanding of that is that understanding the pieces of what you've got and knowing something or not knowing something, that's actually a constraint in itself. Am I correct?
Yes. Ish.
Good. I love ishes. They're so good.
You've brought in understanding. As soon as you bring in understanding, obviously there are depths of understanding.
Yes, of course. But like with what you were saying, I can't remember the exact word you used, but you were talking about when, depending on how much you know about that or what your understanding is and where you are there, that there are more or less constraints depending on your depth of understanding. Would that be a more accurate? Yeah.
Your depth of understanding will change the constraints and affordances that you are aware of. Because there can be constraints in the environment that you're not aware of, which constrain the affordances that you can see, but you're not aware of the affordances that you can't see because you don't know that they're not there. And that's where expertise in an environment, in a skill, affects your ability to see affordances, which is expertise, like in a nutshell, being able to see the affordances in a particular environment. And to add a term that you may want to explore, if not, it's called metastable attenuation.
Right. Oh, I ain't got time to write that one down.
No, that's metastable attenuation for those of you listening. But yeah, that's sideways. As a final point before we move on to the next episode, you said that the reflection and introspection stuff isn't in the productivity space. Now, I see where you're coming from, and I agree to an extent, but I think it's there. It's just spoken about as mindfulness, like mindful this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
And it's that's what it is. Mindfulness is an intrapersonal skill, but there's no empirical evidence, there's no science, there's no substance behind when people say you need to be mindful about this or we need to think about that. But what does that mean? How do I do that? Where is anything like tangible that I can grab onto? Let's do a review. Why? What's the point? A review is reflection. That's literally what it is. But if you're just reviewing what you've done and what you haven't done, that's not reflection, that's evaluation.
That brings up something for me that I found with Indirect Work, which is the book that I'm reading. Like, that's my focus at the moment. That's why I keep coming back to it. But like, some of the questions were annoying because it's like, I've already done this. I'm already doing this. A lot of my issues with, daily pages, morning journals, blah 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 blah. I suppose directed reflection is it's happening in my head already. Like I'm already doing it and I'm already getting what I want from it, which is all I need. You don't necessarily have to have that. You don't necessarily have to have a written down reflective practice. Yes, there are constraints. If you don't write it down, there is no like future reflection. It's a bit harder to do that. It's easier if you get it out of your head, but it doesn't mean you're not doing it.
It would have been affordances, not constraints.
Fuck's sake, suckers!
because
Yeah.
you haven't
No, it is
because you haven't
affordances,
written it
thinking
down.
about it, yeah. Because you haven't written it down as the affordance. Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I'm getting there.
Yeah, because you haven't written it down, there's loads of affordances. So some people need the constraints to be able to focus the affordances.
That's it. Yeah. So so I do not have. So if I just put this into my own language, so I don't have the constraint of writing it out. Like I don't need that constraint at all. It doesn't benefit me, so I don't do it. But it doesn't mean I'm not can't do it. But for other people, that is the constraint they need to get it out of their head, and that is fine. So basically, everyone is right because it depends on what you have.
There it is. It depends.
Well,
I knew it was gonna get there. Yeah, I think that closes it out very nicely. I think the next topic we can move over to the next episode because this episode is moving on a bit. So we'll see you in like 5 minutes or next week for you.
Yeah.